Good afternoon. Hi, I am Frank. I work with Arab World Media, and I'm going to be talking to you some more. Ed did a great job of doing all kinds of fun graphics. So I'm going to be talking a little more about some strategies that we're involved with on building relationships for eternity, and its principles of communications. And I want to first start out by saying to you that if you leave this presentation or this building, if you can take away only one thing, I'm going to encourage you to read this book, Hooked. Nir Eyal has done a great job at outlining a lot of principles on communications. The difference in what he is doing is that he's discussing issues related to what's called low identity communications, which basically means things that's not going to change people's lives personally, that they'll be able to consume some things and add it to their lives, but they won't change it. Hooked is an interesting book because it's all about building, about persuasion. And it can also feel a lot like manipulation. That's why I encourage you to start out by reading chapter 7, which is about the Bible app and how the Bible app has now gone viral. And it's actually probably the biggest usage of an app for Christianity as he talks about in the book. So go first to the Bible app and then read the chapter on ethics, because one of the problems that we struggle with and what we do is, are we manipulating people to actually buy Jesus? And we don't want to be doing that. We want people to enjoy and obtain a relationship with Jesus. Nir and I are discussing his next book, where he's wanting to do a chapter on what's called high identity conversion or high identity communications. So we're going to be changing some of the things that comes out of this book, Hook, but it's actually quite a good book. And then return back to the beginning and start reading the rest of the principles. So start out by reading the Bible app. It's a good application. Then do the ethics and struggle with your issues of persuasion versus manipulation. And then move to the rest of the principles. Now then, today I'm going to be talking about three major communication principles that we get involved with. It's helpful for what we're doing. And some of these things I discuss in my blog called mediatomovements.org, and I'll pick this up at the end of my presentation. But one of the biggest pieces that we want to look at, and Ed talked about this some in what he was doing, is what's called range of tolerance and range of rejection. Essentially what happens in a person who's in a conversion process will have some things that they want to talk about or they're willing to talk about with you, and some things that you simply can't talk about because it moves them too quickly down the conversion pathway. So this is what's called the range of tolerance. And essentially what happens is a person that you first meet, the gospel is an intolerant sort of communication. They're willing to talk about some things like trafficking, tennis, school, morals, anything along that line, family, health, anything that's not going to be costing them anything. But when you start talking about other things like religion, Christians, gospel, church, they're going to reject it. So our first place of communication is going to be actually involving some things that they're willing to discuss. Well, what happens in the course of this conversation, if we're willing to talk about tennis or school, then we create a position where people become comfortable in that stage of communication. And what happens is the person now moves one notch. So instead of gospel being -3, gospel becomes a -2. And then you change your next communication style or your communication model to become something, let's say, religion. And what happens, the person now moves their position in communications. So the range of tolerance and range of rejection says you got to start out where people are in terms of what they want to know, and then move them closer by moving closer to the end objective. So range of tolerance and range of rejection is an important concept, and I discussed that in my blog. Now this one's actually going to be a second principle. It's called agenda setting, and this one is, if you can grasp this concept, you will actually do so much better with your communication strategies. The principle is you don't tell people what to think, but what to think about. Instead of basically telling people the gospel, you tell people to think about the gospel. Let me give you here a picture. Here you are, you're looking at this picture, and you got a guy in a boat. What do you think about when you see this? Since you are sitting at a religious conference and you're talking about Christianity and sharing the gospel, probably many of you have come in your mind the picture of fishers of men, because that's a famous passage that we deal with. Jesus says, "Follow me and I'll make you fishers of men." But if you happen to be a person who is from the Caribbean islands, you'll look at this picture and you'll say, this guy is a fisherman and he's catching fish. He's a native of the area and he's catching fish. So what's happening is in this thing, he is cued, people are cued to the image that's in their mind. We think we're telling him about fishers of men. He's cued to the fact that he's a fisherman. Or he may be in poverty and he's thinking about how poor it is that this is how this poor guy makes a living. He's just barely getting by with some fish. If he happened to be a person who's actually an artist, they'll look at the side of the boat and they'll say, oh, this is quite an artistic boat. So cueing is actually not what we want to say, but it's what the image produces in the mind of the individual. Now, Ed showed some pictures of Moroccans who were cued to imagery of Morocco or Berbers, and that was actually a great idea. So cueing is related to the image of the mind of the person. And this is a little bit on the blog. We discuss the principles of who is your audience and what you want them to do. So you got to think about who your audience is. And when I produce my message, what kind of image is going to come to their mind when we say what we want to say. But within cueing is another major thing, and it's called framing. Framing, you can think of it like a picture, which can have a great beauty to it, and it can put a frame around it, which actually brings out certain colors or certain artistic parts of the image. But the interesting thing is media, or our media devices, are framing devices. For example, the mobile phone happens to have a place by which certain things work on that mobile phone, and then some things do not work on the mobile phone. So you got to think about what is actually consistent with that phone. For example, running a full-length movie off of your mobile phone is really not a good idea of what the mobile phone is made for. It's odd. It's strange. So you got to use short messages, very short imagery, which Ed talked about. Another thing about framing is that we may do, let's say, television programs. But if we just take the audio from a television program and we put it on a radio, it sounds strange, because communications or statements on a radio has to be consistent the way radio messages are sent out. And the person who's actually downloading or listening to a radio frames the message in a way radio is normal. So cueing what's in the mind of the individual when they see the message. Framing is how's the media actually being sent out and produced. Okay, now here's the third principle that's actually important for agenda setting. It's called reactance. When we force a person to actually believe or accept or become too strong in the message, a little bit, this is bouncing back up to a range of tolerance and range of rejection. If we push the communication strategy too fast, if people feel force, they will automatically reject it. And then what gets stuck in their minds is that, oh yeah, I heard that message before and they were trying to force religion down my throat. And they become resistant to future media strategies or media contexts. They become inoculated to the gospel message. So as we're doing agenda setting, don't tell people what to think, but what to think about, allowing them the chance to process a message, putting it in their context by cueing, framing, and reactance. Now, Hook in the book, Near, talks a lot about cueing and framing. He uses some different languages, but he actually says it's actually quite important for communication strategy. I'm going to move into the next one. Is going to be focusing on groups and not individuals. Lonnie is in your group, and Lonnie and I are working on developing a media strategy in Indonesia. And this is actually a very core piece of what we're doing there. We are doing a media strategy that includes the individuals and not the groups. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about a thing called the theory of reasoned action by Martin Fishbein. again, we talk about this on the blog, but I want to kind of walk through this. I'm going to try to walk through this fairly slowly to help us grasp it. What Martin Fishbein says is our goal is everybody's behavior or people's behaviors are logical, they're reasonable, they're not random. People do things for a reason. And the reason they do them is because of what he calls intentionality, and it's based upon beliefs. And what he basically says is that when a person believes if they do a certain kind of behavior, they will actually receive certain kind of results that comes out of that behavior. What that means is if I believe in Jesus, then I'm going to receive peace with God. If I believe in Jesus, my issues will go away, or I'll have a relationship with God. God will hear my prayers. My sin will be taken away. There's beliefs that we have that will lead to an acceptance of Christ. The problem is beliefs are not binary, meaning I believe or don't believe. Beliefs are scaled. When a person starts introducing into the conversion process, they will kind of believe. They'll weakly believe let's say at a +1 level. And then over time, they'll gain more information, +2 and a +3, until finally a person will arrive at a strong belief. And at that point, they'll act on their beliefs and do an intention that will lead to a behavior. So the big takeaway here is beliefs are not binary. Give person a gospel. They didn't believe yesterday. Today they believe. Beliefs take time, particularly when you're dealing with high beliefs where a person is in a conversion process. Beliefs will take time, and it'll take a process by which you'll require it. The caveat to all this is what's called reference group beliefs. And that means not only does the individual have a belief, but he's sitting among his friends, his neighbors, his relatives, who also believe, have some ideas about the gospel or about anything that an individual has. But unlike the individual, reference groups have beliefs that are both positive and negative. And a reference group will actually not be a holistic group. There'll be members within the group who believe, who will be willing to consider the gospel, consider what the person's belief system is, and there'll be individuals who will be negative toward it. So what happens in the conversion process is that a person will, roughly when they get around stage 4, will start to involve their reference groups. They'll start to ask people, what do you think about this? And the interesting thing is that we've discovered when we start working with groups, is that if a person is actually moving toward conversion, he or she will actually involve people who will support their beliefs, their emerging belief system. If we don't challenge them enough that they end up going to the negative reference group, but they actually go to those that will support it, then we can actually create a small cell group who will actually support the emerging conversion. So what we are wanting to do in Indonesia is that as a person reaches around stage 4, we ask them a very simple question, that they get 2 or 3 of their friends together and give them a small question like, how does the Quran compare to the Bible on what it says about Jesus being the Word of God? Or a very simple question, again, going back to our scale of range of rejection, range of tolerance. We ask them certain kinds of questions that will be tolerated and the reference group will tolerate, and will allow them to obtain some relationship together. Once they move into this asking the reference group, then once we know that, then we know that we now are able to send a person to meet with a field person who can continue on the gospel process. But the big takeaway here is beliefs are not binary, they're scaled. Reference groups' beliefs are not binary. They likewise are scaled. Sometimes they're scaled positive and they're scaled negative. And so we have to identify people who are in the reference group who are willing to support a person's emerging conversion. Now, a lot of this stuff, I've kind of went over it kind of fast. You can read about it on my blog, Media for Movements. So here we got 3 things I want you to take away from this: the range of acceptance, the range of rejection, keeping in mind agenda setting. We don't tell people what to believe, what to think, but what to think about. Telling them what to think will cause them to reject you. If you tell them what to think about, they will slowly consider the claims of the gospel and move toward a conversion process. The big piece again is reference groups. It's more important that a person believes with his friends than it is that he believes by himself. Now then, I know you're going to have some table time, and I've actually finished my talk up a little bit early. I want you to take some time to look at Matthew 13, 20 through 23. And some of you know this passage. This is about the parable of the sower. There are 4 seed plantings that went out to the field. One is the seeds that are sown by the rocks. Sown by the road, and Satan comes and snatches the seeds from their heart. Then there's the ones that are sown among the rocks that they take root, but they don't last very long because the sun burns them up. The third one is thrown among the thorns, and they die because they're choked out. And then the 4th seed is sown into the field. What I'd like for you at your table time is to talk about these 4 seeds and ask which ones are individual seeds, in other words, individual making decisions, and then which ones are sown in a group context. This would be a good conversation. If some of you have questions or like to dialogue more with me on this is my email address. I'm perfectly happy to talk to any of you who are wanting to consider some things. The second piece is I do the blog, mediatomovements.org, where we talk about a lot of these principles, and I end up fielding questions also from those. So thank you very much.